Welcome to Ask the Expert with noted radio host Steve Sleeper. Each week, Steve interviews entrepreneurs and professionals and shares their intriguing stories of success and service. Now, here's radio veteran Steve Sleeper.
Welcome to another edition of Ask the Expert, and today we're speaking with Mark Eisenberg with the Eisenberg Law Offices in Madison, Wisconsin. Mark, how are you this afternoon?
I'm well, thank you.
Good, good. Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself and your firm.
Well, we started our firm in 1984. We originally started with my father in a big group. His group disbanded, and my brother and I went out on our own in 1984, and it's been he and I as partners, and we've had other attorneys work for us in the past 32 years, but pretty much it's been him and I.
What should I look for in a criminal defense lawyer, Mark?
Well, you know, there are a lot of criminal defense lawyers in Madison because the university is here. And they're all trying to get cases. I think what you have to look for is someone who is going to give you a good bang for your buck. There are a lot of people that, I don't want to say the word gougers, but there are a lot of people that are interested in getting you in the door, getting your money, and then they don't really care anymore. And to me, I think the most important part of dealing with clients that are charged with crimes is you have to have a relationship where you tell them we're on the same team and this is a team game and we both give effort to achieve the goal that's the best goal that we can for the client. And that is important in my book, that you return phone calls, that of course you have to have the experience and the knowledge of what you're doing, but that you treat the client like you'd want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you get that type of relationship with your attorney, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. One time I asked an attorney, geez, you kind of represent the dregs of society. And he goes, you know, I don't look at it that way. I was raised to help those less fortunate than me and be of service. That would you say that's a good description?
Well, you know, a lot of people will say to criminal lawyers, how can you represent these people? How can you do that? How can you get someone off that you know is guilty? But the response to that is, I'm not God. The person that's talking to me about that isn't God. And our system says that you have the right to have good representation, even though you may have done something wrong. And so, to me, we're not passing judgment on people. We're trying to help them, people that have problems with the law. That's
mm-hmm.
basically what it is.
Mm-hmm. What kind of crimes do you defend?
Well, I can honestly say that I think I have done about everything you can think of. I haven't really had the huge white-collar fraud case, because there isn't a lot of that in Madison. But I've certainly done every other type of criminal act you can think of. Sexual assaults, child pornography, homicides, OWI or drunk driving homicides, thefts, burglaries, robberies, beatings, batteries, you name it, I've probably done it.
I had an attorney once who is still a criminal defense attorney tell me that he compartmentalized when he went home. He just kind of put all that in a shoebox and left it at work. You know, how do you deal with that stuff in your personal life? Because you see a lot.
Well, actually, you know what it is? It's not so much compartmentalizing. It really is, sometimes you just have to deal with clients at all times of the night and the day.
Yeah.
Because these people, you have to remember, are extremely nervous because they think they're going to jail or prison, and you're their savior. You're the one that can keep them from going there. And so sometimes you'll get a call late in the evening because they think it's an emergency, and you know it's probably not an emergency. But sometimes you take that call from a parent or from a client because you want them to feel comfortable about it, and I do try to do that. However, sometimes people will abuse that privilege and call you for no particular reason or something that could wait till the next day. But this is not a job where you walk in the door at 9 o'clock or 8:30 and you leave at 4 or 5:30 and that's the end of it. It doesn't work that way. And even when you go on vacation, you still got these things going on back at the shop or the office that you need to deal with.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a great point. How do people find you when they get into trouble?
Well, my father was a very prominent criminal lawyer in the state, and then my brother and I somewhat rode his coattails because of the name, and however, and so I think our reputation is the major way that people find us. But with all the internet and with all of the other media outlets which lawyers use to try to attract clients, we've had to go to that too. We've had to go to internet advertising, we've had phone book advertising, we've had radio and television advertising. So in Madison, which is a relatively small market, I think our name stands out because of the history of how long we've been here. My dad started in, I think, 1955, and so our name has been known in this area since, for what is that, 45, 65 years.
60 years. That was the year I was born.
Oh, yeah, 60 years, sorry. I can't add.
Yeah. I can only because that was the year I was born. But that's a long time, so people know who you are. And I did a little research on the internet, and you're known for fighting for your clients and representing them well. And that's your reputation.
You know what? I really do think this. A lot of times a parent will bring a kid in, and I'll say, I'll treat that kid like I would treat my own kid. And I think even if you can't win the case or you got a crappy case, as long as you give 100% effort, and as long as the client knows what's going on and what you're trying to do, they really can't bitch. For example, I have a couple kiddie porn cases that in Wisconsin, it's a minimum mandatory 3-year prison sentence as of April of 2012. I've tried to challenge that. I'm trying to challenge some search warrants in those cases because I can't go to trial on the cases because the computers are full of child pornography. But as long as you are doing everything you can to help that person, even if you fail, as long as they feel they got a decent shot, that's all they can ask for, and that's all I try to do.
And I suppose that provides them a certain peace of mind that they wouldn't have otherwise, especially parents if one of their kids gets into trouble or something like that.
Well, for the parent, it's about the worst thing because you always want what's best for your children. And when the children get in the criminal system, the parent is helpless because there's nothing that the parent can do to fix it. And the parent can't make it go away. The parent can't make it feel better. I got a kid right now. He sucker punched a kid in Milwaukee and hurt him very badly. And he got 3 years probation, and he did 9 months in Milwaukee County House of Corrections. And on the last day of the statute of limitations, my client got sued by the kid who he hit. And if the victim pursues this, my client's going to have $1 million judgment against him for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. And the mother wants to help, but there's nothing she can do about it unless she has a lot of money to help him get out of this mess. And that's the problem when you're dealing with parents. They feel so helpless that I try to do the best I can to make them feel that it's not their fault, and we're doing the best we can with what we have to work with because we don't live in a perfect world.
Well, and being a parent myself, I can only imagine that's got to be a tough thing to go through. Now, this kid that you're talking about that's getting sued in a situation like that, what do you do? I mean, if they win, does he declare bankruptcy, or does he always have that hanging over his head, or what?
No, well, because it's a criminal matter, it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. So, so the idea is I'm trying to settle it because the victim's lawyer knows he'll never collect it.
Yeah.
And so he'd rather get something in his pocket now that, even though it may be a small fraction of what he would ever get, at least he got something. So that's kind of the approach we're taking on that.
I see. Okay. What's the most common question you get?
From a client?
From a client.
It depends what kind of case it is.
Yeah.
For the most part, the drug dealers are pretty honest, and they will tell you that this is what they did. Help me get out of this with the least amount of pain, because I know I'm not going to walk out the door, especially when they have surveillance and they have hand-to-hand sales to undercover police officers or informants. So those guys are just basically, what can you do for me? Can you get me out of this with the least amount of pain? When you get to something like a sexual assault, then it's like, I didn't do it because it's such a despicable act to begin with that nobody wants to admit it. So then it comes down to, I didn't do this, we're going to have a trial to get me out of this. But of course, when you take things to trial and you put alleged victims, through the ringer at a trial, and if you lose, judges don't like that too often. So the most sought-after question, I guess, is probably the main one is, how much is this going to cost me?
Yeah,
I get that from all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, one of the questions that I've heard gets asked a lot, and maybe you don't get asked this a lot, but I've heard it gets asked a lot. Can I just walk into the courtroom and talk directly to the prosecutor?
Sometimes I do get that. Like, people sometimes get in trouble and they think they can walk in and just talk their way out of it. And you're correct. And then I try to explain to them, how many times do you think prosecutors hear from defendants that the defendant didn't do it? They're immune to that. So it doesn't do you any good, even if I said, okay, go talk to him. It wouldn't do you any good anyway, because you got to go through the process. Because people, when they get in here, they're anxious, and they want to get it over as fast as possible. But in criminal law, sometimes getting it over as fast as possible isn't the best strategy. For example, like, I had a case where a guy took a machete to his girlfriend and he nicked her head. I don't think he really intended to hit her, because if he would have hit her, he would have killed her. But he nicked her, and they were going to go after him for battery and with a dangerous weapon, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if we would have done that trial right away, she would have testified and he would have lost. She decided she didn't want to have anything to do with this, so she left town. And he got to walk on the charge because there was no witness to testify against him.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose you see just all kinds of emotions, don't you? You know, from both sides of the aisle.
You know, you see you see the nervous people, you see the anxiety in them, and then you see the ones that are, hey, I did it. You know, let's do the best we can with what we have to work with.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
The parents, sometimes it's worse on the parents. I had this kid that was involved in a lot of petty small little drug deals, $100 transaction here and there in like 3 counties. And I couldn't get the felony off his record because one of the prosecutors wouldn't just do it. And it killed the parents more, and the kid was like 19 or 20. It killed the parents more than it killed the defendant, because they wanted what was best for their child, and they knew a felony wasn't what's best for the child, and they felt so awful about it, but it wasn't anything they did, and they couldn't fix it. So sometimes it's worse on the parent than it is on the kid.
Yeah, I would suppose so. And you probably see kids that learn their lesson, never do it again.
Sure you do.
And then you see you probably get some folks that come back, that never learned their lesson. And
it's the criminal thinking mind that some kids learn their lesson and others have a chip on their shoulder. They've had bad upbringings. They see other people in the community that get away with things, and they think they're invincible and they can do it too. A lot of that is with drug dealing, for the most part. I don't think you see too many burglars, or sometimes, but mostly drug dealers. If they get a lighter sentence the first time, they'll go back and try to do it again because, hey, it wasn't so bad the first time, I can try it again, et cetera, et cetera. But most of these drug dealers are so stupid because they do such small transactions, $200-$300 transactions, that are just dumb to begin with because you're not going to retire off, and it's just spending money.
Yeah.
And the risk is so bad on the other end.
Yeah. Yeah, $300 in spending money, and then look at the punishment for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably with crack cocaine and methamphetamines, it's different than it was 30 years ago.
Oh, it's big. It's funny you said that. I had this guy. I tried this case 1993, and he was black, and it was two 2-ounce transactions of crack. Now, in the early 90s in Madison, that was a big thing because crack was the evil. Today it's heroin or sex crimes, but back then crack was the worst thing you could do, and they had minimum mandatory penalties, et cetera, et cetera. So we went to trial and we lost. The judge gave the guy 60 years, 60, which was so out of line compared to anything else. So I went to the prosecutor about 6 months ago, and I said, "This is wrong." The guy was black, judge was a bigot. I said, "This is just wrong." And I had a meeting with him this morning, and he agreed that this was wrong, but we have to take some time to play with it before I can get him out of there. But I think he'll probably be out by the end of the year and he wouldn't be eligible to get out for another 23 years.
Wow.
I can't remember how we got to talking on that subject for a minute, but
we were talking about the crack cocaine, the methamphetamines being a difference from when you first went into practice 30 years ago.
And today this same guy, he had no prior record either. This same guy would have got probation and maybe 3 or 4 months in the county jail.
And he got 60 years. Jeez.
60.
Wow.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah.
Awful. But he was black and was a bigoted judge. The judge is since dead. But it was awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah. Well,
and at that time, it was a minimum mandatory 20-year prison sentence.
Wow.
And they got rid of the minimum mandatories because they realized, it's not the drugs that are so bad. Well, heroin is getting to that point, but there's no minimum mandatories for heroin now. It's the worst thing you can be right now is a sex offender.
Yeah.
The worst.
Yeah. Yeah, look at Jared Fogle. I've read some stories.
But I'm talking about you could be a sex offender. You could be 22 years old and have sex with a 15-year-old. And consensual sex,
right.
Minors can't consent. And you are the scum of the earth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've got that following you the rest of your life, don't you? You got to register as a sex offender and
forever. Yeah.
And I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying that's different than it was 30, 40 years ago. So
I had a case, 1988. The client had been in bed with his 2 kids, 6 and 10. I mean, separate times, but they were from 6 till 10 and from 10 to 14. And he would masturbate on them while they were sleeping. Today, he would have got 20, 25, 30 years. In fact, if they were under 12, it was a minimum mandatory 25 years. I got him 5 years probation, 2 months in county.
Well,
today he would have been in prison for 25 years minimum mandatory.
Yeah, so that's different as well.
It's awful.
Anything else I should know? Let's say I need a criminal defense attorney for a plethora of reasons. What should I know?
What should you know? Well, a lot of times people call me on the phone and they want to sign up online over the phone. And I say, before we do that, you should come in and meet with me, see my operation, see that I'm not a fly-by-night person, see that we got a big-time operation going here, and you should come in and meet with me and go through it that way. So I think, what are you looking for? You're looking for experience. It's not very hard to get reputation if you talk to a few people in town.
And meet you face to face, and that
right.
also gives you a chance to evaluate them as well.
Sure. Sometimes, I mean, there are few and far between cases where I've had somebody come in and they were just such a jerk that I said, "No thanks, get the hell out of here."
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen very often because the people that come in when they're charged with crimes are very vulnerable, and there's some lawyers in town that will, like I said, take their money and never return their phone calls, never sit down and meet with them, never go over police reports with them. That's just wrong. And you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't expect to be treated like that. So, again, reputation, meeting me, coming in and seeing the operation, I think that's a big part of developing a rapport with your lawyer.
How do we reach you, Mark?
You can reach us on the internet at eisenberglaw.org, and then you can call us at 608-256-8356. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And our guest today on Ask the Expert has been Mark Eisenberg with the Eisenberg Law Offices in Madison, Wisconsin, one of my favorite towns. Mark, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for listening to Ask the Expert with Steve Sleeper. Join us next time as entrepreneurs and professionals share their intriguing stories of success and service.